Good evening, everybody. We're back with another live. This is Melinda Nipper from Special Education Advocacy Services of Luzerne. Just want to put the disclaimer out there that the closed captioning should be working. However, if it's not and it's a Facebook issue, you can go into your device's home screen, tap settings, and then tap accessibility, then tap subtitles and captioning. Next to the subtitles and captioning, you can click on and your video should then play with subtitles, with closed captioning. We are so fortunate. We actually have Amy S. Goldman. She's MSCCCL, retired. She was a co-executive director of the Institute on Disabilities at Temple University, PA's University Center of Excellence in Developmental Disabilities, where she was also associate professor in the Department of Psychological, Organizational, and Leadership Studies. Subsequently, she served as the Technical Assistant Specialist for the Eastern United States for the National Training and Technical Assistance Center for State Assistive Technology Act Programs, AT3. Currently, Amy is the president of the U.S. Society of Augmentative and Alternative Communication, and we'll put some links up for these as well, and a member of the National Joint Committee on the Communication Needs of Persons with Severe Disabilities, NJC. And she is also the coordinator for the AAC strand for the Assistive Technology Industry Association, AITA, as well as its continuing education content consultant. She is the current chair of the PA Board of Examiners in Speech, Language and Audiology, president of the National Council of State Boards in Speech, Language, Pathology and Audiology, and past chair of the Steering Committee of the American Speech Language Hearing Association, ASHA's Special Interest Group on AAC. Amy has presented nationally and internationally on AAC and other assistive technologies. Mouthful there, Amy. And it's amazing because you honestly have so much experience and a wealth of knowledge and expertise in speech and language pathology, in AAC. And so thank you so much for joining us. We do appreciate it. And let's talk AAC tonight.
Let's do it.
Excellent. So before we get into it, I do want to share with everybody, because we do have a Bill of Rights for communication. And communication is a human right. It's not even an IEP right. It's not a disability right. But we have, for people specifically with disabilities, a communication Bill of Rights. And can we go through that? Start us off on what communication is and why we have these.
Sure.
I'm going to add to the stream.
Yeah. So let me explain that this is a product of, as it says in the header, the National Joint Committee for the Communication Needs of Persons with Severe Disabilities. And this is not meant for people who use sign language because they are deaf, but rather it's persons with severe disabilities, usually physical developmental disabilities accompanied by intellectual disabilities or autism, as well as sensory disabilities. So what is the NJC? National Joint Committee is an organization that was formed more than 35 years ago with representatives from major disciplines. So the NJC is hosted on the web by the American Speech Language Hearing Association, but is not solely an arm of ASHA, but rather includes representatives from the American Occupational Therapy Association, the American Physical Therapy Association, the Council for Exceptional Children Division on Communication, the TASH, TASH, which used to stand for the Association for Individuals with Severe Handicaps. It includes representatives from USAC, the U.S. Society for AAC, representatives from AAIDD, the American Association for individuals with developmental disabilities. So you see that it is interdisciplinary. So the rights that are articulated here are the product of interdisciplinary agreement, if you will, and starts with the foundational right, as Melinda said, that communication is a human right. So you can find this posted on the ASHA website, www.asha.org/NJC. So it is a living document. So it was recently revised in 2016 to add items related to cultural and linguistically appropriate communication, and several other rights related to self-advocacy and the importance of communication and how it is needed for self-advocacy. Just as an FYI, the NJC is currently working on guidance to help people understand the intent of each of these rights. There are versions with pictures floating around. They are not necessarily authorized by the NJC because, again, the reason for our guidance is we want to make sure that our intent behind each of these rights is fully recognized. So this can be used, hopefully is used, to help people who surround the individual with disabilities in understanding the key components of communication. But more and more, we are working towards how understanding these rights can be a tool for the person with disabilities themselves. So the right to interact socially, so not just labeling, but in fact, the reason you and I communicate is to maintain and build social relationships. Why would we expect anything less for people with severe disabilities? So the right to request desired objects, and unfortunately, that's where some goals stop. And in fact, you want to be able to request not just objects, but actions, events, and people. The right to refuse or reject reminds me of a story. The young man, I think he was actually a teenager, and I was helping him and his family learn an AAC device with speech output. So I was on a consultative basis. And after some initial training, I let them go and I touched base with them about a month and a half later. And I said to Mom, "How's it going?" And she gave me a half-hearted, "Well, sort of okay." And I said, "Well, sounds like something else going on there. What's going on?" And she said, "Well, Dan used to be such an easygoing child. And now he's telling me things like, I don't want it. I don't want to do it. He's rejecting and refusing." And I'm cheering for Dan because that's what we want. That's part of self-advocacy, the right to refuse or reject both objects, actions, events, or choices. The fourth right, the right to express personal preferences and feelings. The right to make choices from meaningful alternatives. If an individual hasn't had experience with the choices that are being offered, they are likely to reject because it's out of their sphere. So first, a person needs to have experience to know the choices. So if I'm given a choice of, do I want A, something that I've never seen, or B, something I'm familiar with, I'm probably going to go for B. And if I'm given a choice between A and C, neither of which I'm familiar with, I'm likely to reject them both and end up being in a situation where my communication is construed as noncompliance. The right to make comments and share opinions. Again, this is how you and I use our communication abilities. We share our comments and we make our opinions known. Again, the issue here is any training or goals that stop at making choices are not going to move a person to full implementation of their rights. The right to ask for and give information, including information about changes in routine and environment. And I think if we look at individuals who may have unwanted behaviors, it may in fact be communication because they don't know what's going to happen next. And if you've ever been in a situation where you don't know what's going to happen next, it is frightening. And it's an area where probably we use our communication tools to find out what is happening. Again, think back if you've ever had an emergency hospitalization. It's so scary, not just because you know something's wrong, but you don't know what's going to happen. The right to be informed about people and events in one's life. The right to access interventions and supports that improve communication. The right to have communication acts acknowledged and responded to even when the desired outcome cannot be realized. So, again, we think about the individual who is saying, go outside, want to go outside, and it's a pouring rain and they can't go outside. So we need to acknowledge that the person wants to go outside and we need to explain why they can't. So it isn't that we would, for example, take away a communication device of a child who keeps pushing the buttons to go outside, but rather it's on us to explain why the desired outcome cannot be realized. The right to have access to functioning AAC, augmentative and alternative communication, particularly what is now called speech generating devices, and other assistive technology services and devices at all times. That means that devices need to go home. So how do you make sure that that happens? You put it in the IEP. I remember colleagues of mine in Texas, the last hurricanes, and USAC, the U.S. Society for AAC, has a committee on disaster relief, and we will help replace devices lost in emergencies and disasters. And we got a request for an individual, for a child who uses AAC, but the schools were closed because of the hurricane. And where was the AAC device? It was at school. So there are many reasons why the device needs to go home. And again, it should be in the IEP because communication doesn't stop with the dismissal bell. The right to access environmental contexts, interventions, and opportunities that promote participation as full communication partners with other people, including peers. So this means we may need to prepare classmates of a child who uses a speech generating device and who is included. We may need to help their classmates understand why Susan uses an SGD, how it is important to her, maybe give the other kids experiences with it, etc. The right to be treated with dignity and addressed with respect and courtesy. And hey, we all want this. This is the golden rule, right? And this includes things like not talking about the person in front of the person, not touching their device unless it's okay with the individual, not putting your coffee cup on the individual's tray where their communication board is. The right to be addressed directly, again, and not spoken for or talked about. Remember that just because a person can't speak doesn't mean they aren't processing what is being said about them. The right to have clear, meaningful, and culturally and linguistically appropriate communications. I think that says it all. To make sure that the messages that we provide access to are culturally, linguistically appropriate and meaningful. So that's the walkthrough from the Communication Bill of Rights. Bring this, print it out, bring it to your meetings. It's the beginning of the school year. Share it with your staff, with your teachers' staff. Your school staff. Have a copy put up in the teachers' lounge, etc. It's really fundamental to how communication can be approached for people who don't use spoken words all the time.
And I think what's really great about the Bill of Rights for communication, Amy, is that it honestly is a guide for IEP teams for building specially designed instruction, goals. Because when we think, even if we've got a child in kindergarten or even pre-K, we're still thinking about transition. 21 may seem like a long way away, but if we not fail that child, if they aren't able to express their wants and their needs at the end of that year, we do have a question. Benita, she's just wanting to know if there's a parent-friendly PowerPoint presentation that explains the process for obtaining. There is on Pattern, and I'm going to put up the AAC because it's it's part of the set. Let me just go into our banners. The assistive technology.
Yeah, so, assistive technology is any device or service that helps a person with a disability do something they couldn't otherwise do. So speech generating devices are part of AT. So they can be included in the IEP under assistive technology. And assistive technology, again, it needs devices and services. And the services can include, should include, training for the communication partners, including, again, classroom staff and families.
And the families is under the related services of parent training and counseling. And that is part of the IDEA regulations. Parents can get training for anything that they may need help with. If you don't understand how to do math for your child and support them from the classroom to home for homework, you can ask for related services for training for that and put it in as specific, explicit training so that you have an understanding on how to help your child. And that should be for the communication device. And communication devices should be with the child everywhere. Otherwise, what we're doing is putting a masking tape over the child's mouth in all other environments. How do they generalize?
Yes. And I would also say put parent training in multiple places. So there's no reason why it can't go in that end of related services, but also under the assistive technology checkboxes.
Yep, absolutely. It should be in present levels as well, that the parent is requesting it. Um, Bonita's saying that is so hard to get. So Bonita is in the Philadelphia region. So as you and I were talking about, Philly's a place unto their own. I think honestly that it has to come down to that there's going to have to be a lot of contacting Patton, contacting the Department of Ed, the Bureau of Special Education, and putting those in until the culture gets changed. Because otherwise, we're taking the wheelchair away.
Yeah.
What does that benefit a child? We're taking their voice away, and that doesn't benefit the child, doesn't benefit the families. Would you agree to that?
Yeah. So is the question that it's hard to get it in the IEP, or it's in the IEP and it's hard to get it delivered?
Yeah, let us know, Benita, because I don't have those problems that you have. Benita and I have talked about this multiple times, and how hard it is to get for Philly. I don't seem to have that problem. I don't know if it's because I use all of these resources at the table and say, well, if you're not going to provide it, then write down why. Let me know. Let the parent know why this is not appropriate for this child. Why a set assessment. So she said they know they need training, but it doesn't get approved by the LEA. That's a straight up complaint. That's parent participation. So it's actually in two areas. One, it's a related service that's been denied, and they'd have to give you cogent reasoning as to why the parent doesn't need that training in writing. And secondly, if it doesn't get approved by the LEA, um, that would be parent participation as well. How can a parent participate in their child's education if they're unable to use the resources that the child needs to generalize, and it's not just at the end of the bell, particularly for communication. Communication has to go everywhere.
Yeah. What's the reason being given for denial?
She'll be typing it in a second.
Okay.
Benita, what is the reasoning for the denial by the LEA? She's typing.
Okay. Because you need to know the reason so you can counter the reason.
And that's that cogent reasoning. That's actually a requirement under IDEA under prior written notice. We're the only state in this country that have a NORAP PWN, because placement is actually part of prior written notice, but we have to have that special PA for some reason. I don't know why. Maybe it's so that it doesn't get missed. Now, I also wanted to bring up, just while we're waiting for Benita, the Power AAC has videos and things as well. This is Benita's like, we don't do that.
That is not a reason.
No, it's not cogent reason.
It
And
does
it
sound
can't
like
use cost.
this is a complaint.
Yeah, I would be on. But yeah, Benita, I will also get you some higher level email addresses too that you can start putting things on that'll get things done. And I'm talking about bureau head, bureau chief.
Yeah, but also if you're finding this several instances of this, Maybe alert the Ed Law Center. That
Systemic
is,
complaint process.
well, also, again, if it's not just one child, but it's a systemic issue, that is the kind of thing that is ripe for the Education
Mhm.
Law Center.
Yeah, and they would take on something like that so long as it can prove to be a systemic um, issue. And I know that, Benita, you're having a lot of that with, and it's not, just cyber charter school, it's all sorts of things that are going on in Philly. And yeah, so yeah, she just said, LOL, Philly. So let's have a quick discussion about what is AAC.
Sure.
You know, I know that a lot of people just think that that's a speech output device, which is what we would call our high tech. What, but what actually encapsulates AAC for communication?
Yeah, so really, AAC is any strategy or modality that is used to replace or enhance communication. So it can range from what I call idiosyncratic signs. So it's made up signs that consistently means something to the user. And, one of the strategies we've used is making a dictionary so that all the people who interact with that individual know when he taps his head like this, it means go outside because he knows he puts a hat on when he goes outside. Or when he does, I don't know, this, that he wants a hug, but that there would be a dictionary. And nowadays it's so easy to do those things because you can make video snippets or photo snippets and put them in a book that says, when Lee does this, it means that. So that's a form of augmentative communication. It's a little bit trickier because the partner needs to be taught what those signs are. Then we have actual signs taken from, for example, American Sign Language and taught to the individual. Now, and again, we're talking about people who are not non-speaking because they are deaf. It has to do with other issues, if you will, other disabilities. So the problem with sign language, like with idiosyncratic signs, is the pool of partners who understand is limited. The other issue with sign language is that many of what I call our people also have fine motor difficulties. So what you end up with really is a sign approximation or an idiosyncratic sign that if you showed to a deaf person, they would not necessarily recognize it. So again, these are great additions with familiar partners who are trained. They're what we call unaided communication. Then, of course, there are gestures that everybody in our culture understands, like, I don't know if you can see me, I put my
Right.
palm down flat and I'm tapping it. So that's sort of give me, right? Put it here, right? What does this mean in our culture?
Shush.
Shush, be quiet, right? And then there's the use of other things like pointing. If I point to something in the environment, as long as it's in the environment, I can tell you something that I want. So I often will start off saying, well, let's model pointing so that Lisa will both understand what I'm talking about because I'm going to point, and hopefully Sam will learn, oh, you can point to something and it means something.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so those are all unaided. Then we have books and boards and wallets. So a system where either it's just alphabet for people who can spell, or it's words for people who might have some reading abilities, or it's symbols, and there's tons of both symbol systems that you need to pay for. And there's also something called the Noun Project that has symbols, but guess what? They're mostly nouns. So that the words are pictured. Again, an example of, we sometimes call it low tech. So low tech doesn't have batteries, doesn't need to be plugged in. It usually does not have spoken output. Then we have what some people call mid tech. So the problem with calling it low tech is sometimes people think, oh, my child student is low functioning, therefore they only get low tech. And that's very bad for everybody concerned.
I've also with the low tech piece, a lot has come back. Well, then is it good enough, right? Or and it's not. It's what's going to work for the individual.
Right. Plus, even our users who have more technology, voice output devices, will need a backup system that doesn't need charging,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't need batteries, uh, doesn't mean the loss of thousands of dollars if it gets wet or lost. So keep in mind that really what we're talking about is multimodal communication. Look at me. I'm speaking, I'm gesturing, right? So and sometimes I text, right? And sometimes I write with a pencil. So we all use
And we look
multiple.
at iconology in our environments, or the
Yeah,
signage, and
right,
I mean, that's all our traffic signage, right? Our
right.
hazard signs and warning signs that we see all over the place. So really, what it is that it's using verbiage, low tech, mid tech, high tech, to provide everything that we all do and we all have access to.
Or to describe it, right? So
Yeah.
our high tech are typically offering the most robust access to communication. And there are ways to start off with those devices and within the same device move to something more complex. And I think that is less understood and less used.
Yeah, because there's a lot
Okay.
that, oh, well, we have to start with this first,
Right.
which is our, and oftentimes it's our PECs communication, it's iconography, it's all of that, everything that we put into the non battery operated, because that's where we have to start. And I've seen there's a lot of data that's coming out now that it's actually that can be for some kids even more limiting than
Absolutely.
providing and teaching them through a voice output device.
Right. Because they hear the model of the spoken output. So, yeah, let me just talk about PECs for a minute.
Mhm.
So, PECs, which is a copyrighted, trademarked picture exchange communication system. It has a specific way that it is to be taught and used. I have seen it used so effectively for kids who don't yet get how communication works. On the other hand, I've seen kids stalled at that stage and they don't get access. I mean, once they learn it, they aren't moved further down the road. So the other misnomer, if you will, is people who think that any use of pictures is PECS.
And it's not,
And
because
it's
there
not.
is fidelity with the PEC system.
Right.
You can have a picture board, it's not PECS,
Right.
or you could have a PECS board, but it needs to be done with the fidelity of the PECS program.
Right. Right.
And oftentimes that we find when we're sitting in meetings that it's often exchanged with the use of the language, but it's really not. There's got to be that specially designed instruction piece that is provided for it. It's not just a goal.
Right.
It has to be throughout that whole IEP in all areas, and where a picture board could be used for communication of wants and needs within that classroom, but they don't have to necessarily have specially designed instruction for it.
Yeah. So
We'd always have goals if we're learning communication.
right. But one of the things talking about goals is the goal is not to use the device. The goal is to communicate.
Yeah.
So there should not be goals or objectives that have to do with pushing buttons.
So using the speech output device should not be the way that the goal is written.
Well, you could do it as
Really?
the condition. So using his blank, 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 Bobby will
And then the communication.
participate in discussion about fall holidays. So you can put it into the condition, but it's not the end.
How do parents navigate the piece where they don't want to put the actual device into the IEP, even though the device is working?
That's a good one, because with my advocacy hat on, I'm like, I'm sorry. We all agree that device A is what he needs. Then why don't we say it? The other thing we could do
Because I
is
could always change it, when it no longer meets his needs.
that's right. That's right. And, if we're worried about, well, what happens when device A breaks? Well, you should always have a backup plan anyway. But the other thing you could do, and this is as stupid as having a reason for not saying the device, and that is he uses a device with this amount, he needs a device with this amount of memory and this size and this capacity. And, you could just describe it.
Yeah.
But
yeah, it falls into that whole methodology thing that, they don't want to get hooked up onto a particular system. However, if you know that child's going to be using, you've already done your set, you've, trialed, and the iPad with Pro Loco is what we are now doing. We know for at least that IEP year for those goals, that is the device and the program that the child will be using. Because if we're switching up and out, we are never going to get correct data on what's really going to work for that child.
yeah, we're never going to get,
progress.
he's never going to get mastery.
No.
So I don't know how many of you, well, I experience this. My phone is an Android. I go into a complete tailspin when I upgrade my model. Things aren't where I thought they were going to be. It operates differently.
Yeah.
God forbid I should switch from an Android to an Apple. I'd really be lost. So imagine now you have a kid with extra learning demands on him, and we're switching out his device. And this is, actually also a problem with, I call it perpetual trials. Oh, yeah, you did pretty well with that, but let's try something else. Let's try something else. After a while, if I was the student, I would say, I'm not going to bother to learn this. They're going to take it away from me.
Yeah, and then it can create behaviors as well, because now I've already gotten used to something. I'm communicating, my needs are being met, and now I've got to try, like, start all over again. I mean, we wouldn't do that to a student in gen ed who has verbal output and we consistently take away their fingers to hold their pencils, right?
Right.
We wouldn't just go in and go, oh, you don't need that index finger, chop it off. Try it now with this. It's the same thing to me, is that you're taking a functionality away from a person.
And, getting back to the Bill of Rights, to me, that's not treating a person with respect and dignity.
I get that. Now, listen, earlier I actually got a private message from Lori, and she wanted to know, and I think that this is a great segue because we can get into SET. She wanted to know, how do I find out what kind of AAC is best for me? It's actually Lori's son. And maybe we jump into SET. I do want to. So SET was created by Joy Zabala, and unfortunately in 2021, Joy passed away. We pay homage to her because she was an amazing woman. She was an amazing advocate, and she really knew her stuff. And so, the SET system that Joy put together, and it was a collaboration. There were other things that people that were involved in it, but Joy's SET is recognized throughout the whole of the states, like a process that we do here in PA. We actually have a process, and I'll put that up in a second, that we follow for assistive tech for the IEP. But be collaborative. You are part of the team, regardless of who is brought in, because I have seen some IUs where they will come in and they talk to everybody but the parents. And then they come together as a team, they have a discussion, and the parents are not involved at all. And then they get told, oh, well, we're going to use this, or no, the child doesn't need anything. So SET, and everything is still live on Joy's page, and she has a lot of resources. So does Pat, and I'll put those up in a second. But SET stands for Student Environment, Tasks, and Tools. So we look at the student first, then we look at, well, what is already in the environment, what is in the environment that the child may need access to, what are the tasks. Sorry, I said tasks. So what is the task that the child needs to be able to do, or the student needs to be able to do, that cannot be done, or that they need access to. And then we have our tools. Well, our tools is our AT piece, whether that be a task analysis sheet of what the child needs to do and they're checking it off. That is assistive tech. Whether that is a speech output device at the highest end, that's assistive tech, and that is all done under the SET. So, Amy, take us away on SET, and how would this parent start to go about doing this, and how do they know through trial what would be the best device?
Yeah. So, first of all is the analysis of SET. And then there also needs to be, I call it a functional analysis of how is the child communicating now, and where is that current mode not effective or efficient. And it's interesting because you're not going to get a full picture unless you are observing the child in multiple E's from the SET E's environment, And I would even say that a good evaluation is going to look at the child in the home environment as well. I know in my experience as a clinician and as a consultant, we've had instances where the parent says he does X at home. Teacher says, I've never seen him do X at home, and vice versa. So you really need to do those functional assessments in multiple environments. And the other part of the assessment is so think about those questions that you might have learned about when you learned how to write a good paragraph. So who? So we want to look at who the child communicates effectively with. What are the aspects that make that effective? Why? Why does the child communicate? For what purpose? Because if you have a child who is only communicating to ask for things, which sounds like the child might have had too much therapy, that's a problem, because if we give him a communication device, what's he going to use it for? Only for asking for things.
It
And go
needs to be
back
telling and
to the Communication Bill of Rights about what are the things that a skilled communicator can do. So that's the why, which reminds me of a story that Johnny was a 5-year-old non-speaking kid, and his parents took him to specialists, developmental pediatricians, everything. They couldn't find anything, quote, wrong with him. One day at breakfast, Johnny says, ugh, this oatmeal is disgusting. And of course, his parents are ecstatic. I say, Johnny, you're finally talking. Why are you talking now? And the answer was, up to now, everything's been okay. So again, that's part of our environmental assessment and looking at the tasks. Does he have a reason to communicate? Or is everything, all of his needs anticipated, all of his wants? And I would challenge any parent who thinks, or any communication partner who thinks they are a 100% correct mind reader, because you're in the wrong business if you are. You should be,
let's get some lotto numbers out there, right?
a psychic, right? Right. And then what? What does the child talk about? Or communicate about? That's another issue that is not going to be solved by giving a device. If they will only talk about leaves or pencils or dinosaurs or trains. So that'll be another aspect that we need to consider. But when it comes to the technology itself, there's something called a feature matching process. So we know that the high-tech stuff has a set of features, just like we know with your phone. Okay. So the goal is to delineate the features that the child can benefit from. Interdisciplinary collaboration is really a key with this, because of the motor aspects, the visual aspects that need to be taken into account, as well as things like the child's level of understanding and vocabulary. So once the laundry list of features is identified, literally we look to match it with technology that's available to us. And the good thing is that there are many resources in Pennsylvania to trialing the matches. So we can look at device A that seems to be a match. And then we can see, oh, I'm not sure if he can handle the smaller size icon that this device, app, whatever, offers. So maybe we need to look at a different device where you can change the size, the scale, the background color of the icon. So the problem is the trials should have some clinical hypotheses behind them. It shouldn't be a matter of, oh, he did well with that. Let's try another one. Let's try another one. Because that will really, well, for me, I've seen it mess up the parental trust in the process because they don't understand why there's a series of trials. Is it because ultimately you want to string this out? Ultimately, you want to deny my kid the device? Or if you say to me, we're going to try another device because this other device has a different organization.
Or a limitation.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
right. So the trials should have a purpose. They should have a time limit. Parents should be asking, what data are we collecting? How will we know
Who's
that it's
collecting
the
it?
right device? At what point are we going to discuss this? And by the way, how do we take into account the student's preference?
And the parent training and the teacher and communication partner training needs to be in that set process too.
Yes.
And that's often left out, that piece.
Yeah. So there's no exact like paper and pencil test to find out what technology is best. It is, in fact, often this feature matching and then validating the process with a trial. Yes, thank you for posting that. Again, one of the resources that we have in Pennsylvania is the lending library through Tech Owl. Now, the good thing about the lending library, so it's also there's loaners available through Patton, but
the school has to
right,
request those.
right. So when I was at the Institute on Disabilities, had at least 2 instances where parents went, borrowed from Tech Owl, what it was called something different at the time, actually videoed the child with a successful trial with the device, brought that video into the IEP team and said, now tell me this isn't a good device for my child. So
yeah, and that is the power of parents that you can. So with TechL, you can borrow up to 5 devices. I would, if you have external speech services for your child, ask the speech pathologist what they would recommend. But I would borrow. I mean, I get parents to borrow from TechOut all the time. They can borrow up to 5 devices, or assistive tech at any one time. It's free. You get, even the postage back is free. You just go on, sign up for a profile, and then you can start borrowing. But this is, unfortunately, with Patton, with the assistive tech, is that it does have to be borrowed. However, I do want to let everybody know that I've just found out about a month ago, but we hadn't had a live yet, that Patton now has the Allcam available for trial, for visual. So, which is great because Allcam was always denied in schools that I've been in because of the recording feature. But now that they've got it for trial, they can't deny it if it works. And obviously it's a very expensive device. And one of the other things that they have at the moment too is they have a new system where it will take the books and it will actually increase the size of the font and it's it's a page reader. So it does have to have a computer as a specific computer system with it. I think it's like a Google, not a Google, a Chromebook type thing, and it's not, it's a bit clunky, but I mean, it's still great because then the kids can have access to that in the classroom with their peers, reading everything else, reading the same things that they are. But it also has a read along feature. So it's not just expanding the visual field of the words for the kids, but it also has the audio that is often
Right.
needed. So we have some great stuff coming out of patent.
Yeah.
Schools can request trials. You know, communication partnerships, so like that though, is something that regardless of the technology we have to do. So what do you tell parents what a communication partner is?
So you are the communication partner to your child. Your teacher is a communication partner for your child. The lunch lady is a communication partner. So, one of the proven strategies effective for enhancing AAC is called modeling. And basically, what that is the partner models the behavior, either the pointing to a device or gesturing, that they want the child to use. So, in some cases, we have a teacher having an iPad with the same program that the student is trialing or using. And the modeling is done without expectation of a response. So it's not a manned model where it's like, you want cookie? Cookie, you do it. Cookie, that kind of thing. But again, this is proven to be an effective way of increasing the use of AAC modeling. Guess what? Parents need training in how to model. Teachers need training in how to model. So, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Just in regards to the communication partnerships, it's really, to me, because of one of those, every single person has the right to have peer relationships, maintain and sustain friendships without communication that both partners can understand. It's limited.
Right.
And so even if a child is in a gen ed classroom, and they should be in gen ed, that communication partnership should be with all of their peers. And I do get, some pushback on that. Well, hang on, we can't force that on kids. I'm like, but you're not forcing it.
Right.
If you're offering it, kids will want it.
Right.
And if
And
you're modeling it,
right, modeling.
allowing the access, kids will want it.
Right. Right.
It's only through our behavior that children change,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
you know.
Absolutely.
Um, then when we get into, because obviously we have a lot of myths, a lot of myths with communication. We've only got a few minutes left. I did pick out the 5. A lot of them are common. So let's quickly go through them and let's like
Yeah.
smash them down, debunk them.
Yeah. Actually, the biggest one is, well, he says a few words, so he doesn't need AAC. And another part of that is, well, if we give AAC, then he'll never learn to talk.
Which is one of I've got it as number 5, but that is the biggest one that we hear.
Yeah. And
And,
unfortunately, and very upsetting, we sometimes hear that from speech pathologists.
and can you talk about how that is a myth that's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
true?
So again, there is research that says, in fact, introducing AAC and introducing it early will either have no effect on speech or it will have a positive effect. So, what's the risk, right? There is no downside in introducing AAC and introducing it early. And by
And that,
early, yeah, go on.
yeah, that dignity and failure as well. I mean, that's how we learn.
And you
And
know what? Look, imagine this. You go, you do feature matching, and you give a 3-year-old a $5,000 device. Okay. And by the way, Medicaid will pay for it. And at 6, the child doesn't need it anymore. Are we going to complain? Oh, we wasted that money? Or are we going to celebrate?
And Joy, that research that you were talking about, was that Jane Corsten's research?
Yeah,
Where they say by 18 months, babies have heard 4,380 hours of spoken language, and yet we don't expect them to be fluent speakers. But if an AAC learner only sees symbols modeled for communication twice weekly for 20 to 30 minutes, it will take 84 years for
yeah,
them to have the same exposure to aided language as an 18-month-old has to it.
yeah, that's our modeling argument.
Yeah.
So, but this one, you can't go wrong by providing AAC to somebody who does not have speech that works for them all the time.
And in the law, there is what we call that least dangerous assumption, right? So we should always be looking at what's the least dangerous assumption that we can make about an individual, because it's not going to, if so long as it's not going to hurt,
Yeah,
right?
right,
If there is no harm, there is no harm in trying.
right.
So let's have a look at myth number 4, which is AAC is a machine that can produce speech. Obviously, throughout a whole conversation, we're saying no, no, no.
Multiple modalities.
Yeah. And we should be looking at multiple modalities because that's how everybody communicates.
Right.
Only children who don't use words need AAC, which, again,
Right, right. And particularly, we do know there's a subset of kids with autism. They have lots of words. They can repeat commercials from one end to the other, but they don't have functional communication.
and having that communication means not just that you can have your needs and wants met, but you are also able to identify that danger, be able to respond, be able to let somebody know that something has happened,
Right,
that safety issue. So it's more than just I can have a conversation with you. It's that it's functional,
right,
right?
right.
And then we've got number 2, which is AAC systems place undue stress on families. I laugh at this one all the time.
Well, it depends how you define stress, of course. Um, you need training if the system is complex, then you won't be stressed. Um, I don't know where they make this one up from, what the root is. All I know is if you deprive a child of an effective means of communication, they will find an effective means of communication, even if it means extreme behaviors. And you want to see a family under stress?
That's where you're going to find it, right?
Yeah,
Extreme behaviors.
yeah,
So, and the myth number 1 is AAC cannot be embedded in natural routines, which is, the whole community piece, the things that are happening at home. We know we gesture for things all the time. Isn't that part of natural routine? So gesturing is part of that.
yeah, yeah. So I would even say, I hear communication can't be embedded. It can only happen at communication time. No, no. So,
Again, that tape over the mouth, right?
right, right.
So, Joy, it's been a pleasure having you, and I definitely will have you back again if you would so kindly grace us with that.
Sure. We didn't even get to talk about vocabulary,
No, we didn't. So,
addition, funding. So
Yeah. And so I would love to have you back again in a month or so, and we can talk about funding and those sorts of things, and vocabulary and how it's stepped.
sure,
If you're using a verbal output device, how should that be built? How do we build that vocabulary? How is it just not icons on the screen?
nouns,
Yeah.
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 Well,
So,
October is International AAC Awareness Month.
well, maybe we do October. Let's celebrate it. And we'll get that out there. Thank you so much, Joy. It has been an absolute pleasure. I always love talking to you anyway. I'm glad that everybody got to hear your wisdom tonight. If anybody has any questions on AAC, please, put them in the chat. I'll get them to Joy. We will answer everything that
Amy,
everybody has.
yeah,
Sorry, Amy. What am I? See now, because I've got her on my mind.
Joy, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
She truly is missed, and for everybody that was ever touched by her. So, um, thank you so much, Amy. I really do appreciate it. Everybody, good night, and we will see you on the next live, which will be happening in a couple of weeks, and I'll let everybody know what that is once we've got it all scheduled. Thank
Great.
you.
Thanks. Good night.